I'm Carol, and licensed clinical mental health counselor, and I'm a CFLE, which is a certified family life educator. And the thing is about conflict and management of conflict is my favorite word is management. I don't use resolve or result or repair. I like, but it's really management. But we'll talk about resolution, yeah, and management. But I started out with my internship teaching anger management and domestic violence groups for the offenders. So that's how I started out with groups along many years ago, and I just loved it. I loved running domestic violence groups, and these were the offenders out of jail, out of they weren't first time offenders. So and I just loved running those groups, and so I have taught anger management groups for like 5 years, and I love it. And then my other job, I do court-ordered anger management teaching and conflict resolution and thinking errors groups and classes all the time. So this is like a subject that I really, really like talking about. And I kind of threw this in really fast with Heather. I was like, Heather, I am now seeing in 1 week of therapy, I see quite a bit of people, and then I teach these other groups. And so in 1 week, I noticed the irritability is just going up and up and up and up. And I'm funny, so this is what this is the funny part. How many of you have wanted to throat punch somebody in the last 3 days, in the last 24 hours? I mean, seriously, like you have to hold back, and you're like, oh my gosh, like stupid drivers, people at the store, your kid, just the television, the news. This COVID thing has really heightened us because it's exactly textbook to me. There's like these stages that I'm going to go through. And there's these stages of burnout that we go through, and then we get into the irritability because it's grief. So it's stages of grief that we're going through. So I just was like, we've got to do some anger management and some conflict resolution because I am a certified domestic violence counselor. In Utah, you have to be certified to deal with couples like that. I don't do domestic violence currently, but I am very knowledgeable in that and how the law works with domestic violence and what domestic violence is and child abuse. Because in my court-ordered other job, court-ordered classes that people come in and take because they're court-ordered to take them after a charge. So we're going to talk about domestic violence and anger management for sure, and conflict. But first, I'll go over the benefit real quick on this slide. If you've done these before, you've seen this. Just a little bit about Blomquist's benefit. It's through your employer, and we're here to help you with any clinical, financial. We have lots of resources, and now we've upped these classes. We have a 24/7 crisis line that you can tap into. So there's a little bit of that, right? So multiple offices across the state and out of state. So domestic violence. So I'm going to move my little screen here so I can read this because it's in the way. Okay. So here's some domestic violence. I took this right off the code, Utah government code here. So and I'm going to mute somebody because of the background noise. So mute yourself if you are unmuted. There we go. So domestic violence is confusing to a lot of people. Honestly, people don't understand what domestic violence is. So domestic and we have intimate partner domestic violence. So domestic violence is someone that you know, someone you've lived with, someone that you are related to. If you just throat punched a complete stranger at the store, you're going to get an assault. So this is different. This is someone that is close to you. And it's a lot different than what you think. You do not have to physically touch the person, or someone doesn't have to physically touch you. it's throwing. You can't throw something across the room at someone. You can't take their keys. You can't take their communication device. That's domestic violence. Taking their phone, breaking their phone, hiding their phone, because that's a safety issue. You can't take someone's keys, so they can't drive away, so they can't leave the situation. And it's usually someone that you know. It's not, yeah, these are all someone that is, like I said, related, you've lived with before, it's your brother, it's your mom, and there's just lots of heightened stress that's happening right now. And of course you've heard, but I tried to find real statistics, because I don't go by the news. I'm trying to find real statistics because I know how to read those, and it's like, okay, so how much is domestic violence up right now? Well, it's up. We just know that crisis lines and domestic violence lines and abuse lines, any kind of crisis lines are up anywhere from 800 to 900% right now. So we've got something going on, correct? So this is like, I take this very serious. It's something that we need some help on. So I have listed just the domestic violence lines in the Salt Lake City Police Department crisis line, and the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and the YWCA line for Utah. So anyways, little statistic there, 42% of all Utah homicides are domestic violence related, 42%. So we have really high rates of domestic violence in Utah. So I hope that if you know of anyone, if you feel like something's needs to be managed and I need help, that you reach out for other people. Of course, in any domestic violence situation, it's 911. So here's anger. So we're going to talk about anger. Anger is a lot of things that people don't understand, and I'm going to go through some myths of that. The 3 types of anger when I teach anger management is aggressive, passive aggressive, and passive. So what's the cool thing about this, and I can't go into fight, flight, or freeze, which is our response brain as much, we don't have time. I've gone into that a little bit before in past webinars about stress management and how to manage your mental health. I went through all that. I have that video if someone wants it. Just how to manage your mental health, and that talks about the brain and how to manage that. But the thing is about anger is aggressive, passive aggressive, and passive are the same thing as fight, flight, or freeze. So think about it. Fight, aggressive, passive aggressive is you're fleeing, and passive is freeze. You will freeze. So in relationships, we use these 3 in the same way. Okay. So really quick, just really brief. Aggressive. It's direct but disrespectful. You are direct. I would really like you to do the dishes. But then you call the person, and I don't really want you to do it in a lazy way, or you call them a name, or you shame them, and I really need you to do the dishes, and this time do them right. It doesn't work. That's aggressive. That's direct, but it's aggressive. Passive aggressive is, I mean yes, but I really mean no. But wait, I say yes, but no, wait, I really mean no. So it's that person that says, I'm going to help you move, and I'm the only one with the truck, and then you don't show up. And then you maybe lie about it, about why you didn't go and help them move. That's super passive aggressive. So you say yes to somebody to get them off your back, but you really mean no. And then passive is like, hey, everybody else is right, I'm wrong. I'm going to let, and I hear this a lot in therapy from people of like, I'm just a peacemaker. I don't like conflict. I like to be the peacemaker. Nope. You know what? Sorry, folks. That's all that is passive. So assertive is very direct with respect. And you say, I feel and I need. Those are 2 words that's all you need to know about how to be assertive is I feel and I need. So we have to know what we're feeling, and you have to know what you need though. And then that's boundaries afterwards. So I do have a handout on how to be assertive. I'm not going to go over assertive because that's a whole other class. It's a great class, but we can do that one next month or something. So assertive training and assertive management is super important, but I do have a great book on that in the back of this. All my references are in the back on several books. So assertive, it's called Crucial Conversations, How to Have a Crucial Conversation is super good. And, you know, it's like, how do you get what you need and what you know, so it's a win-win. And you got to say, and you've got to express how you feel. Because if you don't know how you feel, you can't ask for it. So this is my little chart here next to this is managing your anger. I have this in my office, and it's this little magnet, so I can show the kids, like, here's anger, right? Here's anger, and then here's all these secondary emotions. But anger is a secondary emotion, so these are all secondary emotions, and this is what leads to, you know, there's just lots of different things going on. So it's what's going on, it's what's behind it, all that kind of stuff. I always say what is happening, what's going on, and what's behind it. That's what we're going to get to with our later on slides about the root issue. So, clues. You by the way, if it's emotional, physical, and behavior, if you're feeling some sort of emotion, a physiological response, and then you have a behavior from it, those are all clues that something's coming on, which is your aggressive, passive aggressive, or passive. So those you don't have a physiological response when you're not in flight, fight, or freeze. So that just note that. Okay, so in the defining anger, so like I said, anger is a secondary emotion to me. There's a couple researchers that put that at the beginning, but it's mad to me, and then it's anger. So anger is a secondary emotion. It relates to rage and resentment and loneliness and insecurity and jealousy. So these are all just, here's the primary, mad, here's anger. So we can just be mad. Anger and mad, all these emotions are all needed. They're all just signs. I call all emotions signs. They're all signs to make us move to the next level if we need to. Or we can, if we feel hurt, or if we feel lonely, or if we are outraged, or we're frustrated, we feel insecure. That's going to happen. So we just have to know that anger is a secondary emotion. We're mad, then we'll get angry. We're just mad at something. That's fine. You just emotionally coach that with your kids, with yourself. And then what happens is, here's the secondary: resentment, loneliness, worthlessness. And then we go into feeding the root of loss, grief, and powerless. That's what's behind it. And I have a little exercise in a minute that shows that root, those root issues. Okay, so here's some myths. Anger is inherited. No, it's not. It's not. Sorry. Oh, my dad was really, really angry, and that's how I grew up, and his dad was really angry, and, you know, I can say that about my dad. No, it's not inherited. Now, your environment makes a really big difference in how you deal with anger, how you've been emotionally coached, how you're shamed in emotion. But it's not inherited. It's not a genetic thing. It's not. And neither's a lot of things that we think are genetic, but that's another time. So anger leads to aggression and rage. No, it doesn't. We can have anger. I can be angry at the lady at the store because I couldn't return something, and I can be like, this is really dumb. I can't return. I've used this in my groups, and I relay stories about myself because we can make fun of myself. That's good, right? So I'm like, this makes me angry that I can return this, but I can't return this at this time during COVID, you know. So it's like I was returning something. Oh, wait, that's really weird that I can return this. I've touched that. And this is plastic, and I haven't even opened this, and this is, you know, and it wasn't food, by the way. So I was like, oh, so anger leads to aggression and rage. I had to, if I wanted to get aggressive with the, you know, the grocery store lady, or if I wanted to be rude, if I wanted to rage, yeah, I could have thrown something, I could have raged, and I could have been aggressive. That is not necessary, because I can self-talk and go, wow, it's not her fault. I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to throat punch somebody right now. Not today. Right? I hope you're laughing, because see, I love doing live teaching because I can see your faces, but you can just see mine, and I can, you know, So I hope you're laughing. Okay, so because it's true. Anger gets what you want. No, it doesn't. It does not get what you want. Kids really think that that's what they, that they're going to get what they want if they throw the tantrum that turns into rage. Now, anger is okay, mad, but rage, okay. We've got to have what your limits are within emotional coaching, and that's the past class that I did that's really good about that, just emotional coaching. And anger is not a habit. Nope, sorry. So what happens is we have neural pathways in the brain. Your fight, flight, or freeze is a habit. Your brain will go to that. So if someone's getting angry at you or you're getting angry at someone else, that's a habit of how you have related to coping, right? And your neural pathways have made this little roller coaster in your brain that says, yep, every time someone says this to you, or every time you are ornery and you're tired and your defense mechanisms are heightened. Your defense mechanisms, those are scientific. Your defense mechanisms kick in and your fight, flight, or freeze kicks in. That's a habit because it's neural paths that you've built in the brain. To reverse those, that's some replacing habits with breathing instead of yelling, but that takes a lot of work and that takes some self-talk. Anger is a primary emotion. I don't teach it that way. Anger is a secondary emotion. So here's mad, then we go into anger, resentment, and frustration, and all rage, and that's all secondary because it's here's this. We move into that, and then the third party is the loss and grief. Venting anger physically is therapeutic. Now, I have actually, and that is there's studies on that, and I found one that I read again, and I have in parenting therapy or play therapy, I'm like, so you can have your stuffed animals in the corner. If you need to throw your stuffed animals in the corner at the wall, do it. Now, when I have a kid beat the bed with a bat because there's monsters in their room, that's not anger. That's not physical anger. It's I'm going to beat the monsters, the trolls that are in my room that I want to get out, and then I can go to bed. But therapeutically, statistically, being angry, like punching a pillow, throwing something, like punching, you've heard like punching a pillow or punching something. When you're angry is therapeutic. It actually doesn't help. It actually makes you set it into a habit. So your neural pathways say, oh, when you get angry, you just continue your anger and physically punch the pillow. So take it as it is with that. I don't recommend. There's lots of other things that we can do first, for sure. So when anger leads to behavior. So here's the emotion, right? So remember, we have thought, feeling, and behavior in the brain on this slide. It says thought, feeling, and behavior. That's how the brain works. We have a thought that comes in, we have a feeling that's produced, then we have a choice in the behavior. We have power over our behavior, 100%. We really do. It takes practice, but this is the problem when anger leads to behavior. So we have a thought, oh, stupid store, I can't return this. Feeling, I'm so put out, I walked in here, thought I changed my mind, I need to return this or exchange this. Nope, we're not doing that right now. Okay, my behavior is, I'll wait. I'll self-talk myself down. It's gonna be okay. It's not a big deal. It's $14 worth of lights, whatever. So it's like self-talk, right? So you have to understand what happens when our behavior is compromised by anger, our fight, flight, or freeze. We go into an aggressive state. This is different. Aggressive is not okay, remember? That's fight. So we're going to fight. So the definition of abuse is harming yourself or others. That's it. Simple 4 words. Harming self or others. It's just, that's what it is. So I talk about abuse all the time, what that looks like, different levels of abuse. So what happens with aggressive behavior of abuse? Well, you can have impairment in the court system. You'll get a charge. road rage, breaking your family values. So here's your family values up here, and you've made this rule about what we do when we get angry. Do we get to punch the wall? Do we get to kick people? Do we get to swear? Do we get to scream? If those are things that you've decided that are off limits, then this turns into aggressive behavior. So here's anger. Okay, here's mad, but here's aggressive behavior. So do you see the difference? We're getting into moving into that. So when you have a payoff, it gets passive aggressive. So it's like, so you have a payoff of making someone miserable, manipulating them, or being vindictive. So that bottom one that my slide is covering, I think my little picture is covering actually a little bit, but if you can see the slide, some of you can't because you're, but if you can see the screen, when you have a payoff, when trust is broken, we have behavior that really causes some serious damage in relationships. But passive aggressive turns into manipulative, and then it turns into vindictive, and that's the word you can't see on my screen. I'll fix that. So vindictive, it's on purpose. It's very vindictive, manipulative. So you can look up those two words. But when we get into passive aggressive, it's really damaging for relationships because it really breaks trust and gets into other personality traits. Okay. So now here's the behavior. We've moved into the behavior. We have issues and impairments in the behavior now with relationships. And so now what does that do? Well, it leads into burnout. If we're in constant fight, flight, or freeze, we're in constant aggression, we're in constant, our adrenal glands are sending stress hormones of cortisol. When we sit in that consistently, daily, which we're in regular stress burnout right now, because the first one was honeymoon burnout. Then we're moving into other burnout stressors. This is just a slide to show you what cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and physiological responses that you might be having, and you've got to watch that. So if someone's in burnout, we're not going to have very good coping mechanisms. So I can teach you how to have anger management or conflict resolution, but if you're burned out, good luck. If your kid's burned out, if they're not sleeping, if they are chronically depressed, we're in depression and hopelessness and confusion and numbness, you're not going to have very good skills. You're going to have impaired listening. You're going to withdraw. You're going to have aggression. And then physiological, you're going to have illness, stomach aches, nausea, really low immune system. It kills your immune system. All this does. So we want to keep your immune system up. We want to be healthy. So we want to fight our own stuff. And so it's like, how do we do that if we're physiological burned out? We just don't. So and you think about cognitive, you're focusing on the negative, rigid thinking. Those are all thinking errors. So this is what happens when we have a high aggression and then we have high behavior from that, and then we go into high burnout levels. So just a little bit of that. Okay, so we're just kind of defining what conflict and anger is, and those myths are really important. We have to know what's going on, and so that's why I'm going through these, and then we'll get to some coping. Define conflict. It's a clash of interest, okay? In a lot of different areas, in racial, class, social, political, the root issue internally. So you could have conflict internally. I call that you're clashing with your own moral code. So if you have a value system and you're not living by that value system, you will clash inside of yourself. And that's a conflict that causes extreme anxiety and worry and panic and depression. So that's where there's a root issue here, right? So conflict in groups often follows a specific course. Many conflicts are thinking error stories without facts. So thinking errors, great. I mean, I have that list if you really want to think, wow, what are thinking errors? I don't even know what those are. I will send you that list. It's not in this PowerPoint. But thinking errors leads to a lot of conflicts because we think that we're a fixed, when you're a fixed mindset and you're jumping to conclusions, you're black and white thinking, you're overgeneralizing, you're blaming. Do you see how all that causes conflict? The opposite of conflict is compassion. So I have this little compassion. I actually have it right here on this, on my, this note. I have on a sticky note. It says compassion is connecting with the right person over the right issue at the right time. And I love it. And then at the bottom of that little note, I have shame and fear can't tolerate connection. So shame and fear, what's fear? Well, anger base, we have mad anger. It's usually a lot of fear-based stuff. So what do? We don't want to connect. So that's the opposite of compassion. If you want to have a child connect, if you want to connect with your spouse and your partner, if you want to connect with your coworker or the grocery store lady, you have to have compassion. You have, and so back to my story that I just come up with that I didn't, I don't know which stories I'm going to tell, but so it's like, so she's like, she looked at me, she goes, yeah, I know it's stupid. I don't know when they're going to let you return stuff, but I know it's stupid. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of stupid. So we had compassion for each other. It wasn't her. So we connected, right? And then I could go like, okay, I'll just put it back in my sock. I'll bring it back another time. It's not like I don't know where Smith is. You know what I mean? It's okay, but everyone's telling, there's just different things that are going on. They're like weird, right? So you're like, I can't make sense of this. So you got to connect. You got to still have compassion. Right person over the right issue over the right time. Now, if you can do that with your kiddos, good luck with that. But it can happen. And even if you get with the right person over the right issue, oh wait, at the right time, I can connect with you. So really remember that's the opposite of conflict. It's not a clash. It's connection. So you can have a different opinion. That's not a clash. You can have, but a conflict is not a different opinion. So here's your clues again: emotional, physical, behavior, same thing. So if you're going into an emotional conflict, a physical, and you feel your physiological body respond, and then you have a behavior because of it, and you get angry, that means you're having some conflict of a root issue internally, socially, politically, universal. So there's universal conflicts, right? And there's personal, internal conflicts. Okay, so here's some myths for conflict. Conflict will lead to anger and blame and resentment and all those other secondary emotions. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have to. I mean, think about when you've had a conflict and you've fought with yourself internally, or you've had a little conflict with one of your kiddos, and it's like, okay, here's this. Did it have to go into blame and resentment and extreme rage? No, it doesn't. Conflict is good. Conflict is normal. Conflict can be conflict. The myth is that it's not safe. Conflict absolutely has to be in our world, because if we didn't have conflict, the opposite of connection, we wouldn't go and connect. We wouldn't. So it's just an opposite of like joy and sad, right? So here's sad, here's joy. We know what both of them are, but we need both of them. So conflict is okay. Conflict, the myth is conflict is better when it's avoided. I like to just be the peacemaker. I just avoid conflict at all costs. That's called passive. Those are my stuffers. Stuffers turn into volcanoes. Those are my stonewallers that we're going to go over in a minute. That is not healthy. We need conflict. We need to resolve some conflict. We need to move through conflict. It doesn't mean that it's not going to come up again. Conflict is better avoided. Nope. That will just turn into stuffing, and conflict needs to be solved and fixed. Nope, it does not. It needs to be managed. That's the different word than fixed or solved. It can be managed. Conflict can be managed, and when you have disagreements, that turns into anger. So then it's like, okay, how do we move through that? That's just your coping. So, and it doesn't need to be addressed right now. In one of my handouts, I found a blog thing that I wrote about conflicts several years ago, and I just found that when I was doing this PowerPoint. And I love, by the way, doing these because, man, do I start digging up some new stuff or some old stuff, or I research some stuff. I found, I'll talk about it in a minute, but I listened to a podcast last night. I downloaded a new book today, listened to the first chapter on my walk. I just man, things come when I am teaching these, and then I, can relay it to you guys. And books are just the next step, just taking a book and going through that book, and really going through what anger is, what conflicts are. And like I said before, Crucial Conversations in the back of this PowerPoint is one of my top 5 most favorite. It is my top 5. I have top 5. I don't put them in a number, but that one is in my top 5 list of books. It's just one of my favorites. So how to deal with conflict, you go to Crucial Conversations book, and you get a win-win. You figure out what is good for you, and how to have boundaries, and how to get the thinking error story out of your head. That's the summary of that book, basically. So don't address it immediately. You don't need to. So this is the example. You do not need to aggressively address conflict immediately. Your teenager comes home at 1 o'clock. Their curfew is at 12 o'clock. What should you do? You've been awake for an extra hour, worrying about them. They didn't call you. They didn't text you. They didn't say where they were. They just got home an hour late after curfew. You've already set the boundary. Your job is to hold them. The teenager's job is to push them. That's how it works with their brain. That's the next parenting class. I think it's in August. It's called Brainstorm. So this is the thing. Is it necessary to deal with that conflict right then? And I'm telling you, absolutely not. Because anytime you're tired, hungry, and when I'm doing substance abuse groups, I always add impaired. If you're tired, hungry, impaired, which nobody is, hopefully, when they're coming home at 1 o'clock in the morning, don't do anything. Do not do anything. You do not address it. You say, I'm sorry. You've kept me awake, and I'm really angry right now, and I'm really upset that you came home late. So tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we will address this. So there's some, I guess some statements that came from past generations, and one of them is never go to bed angry. False. Biggest myth ever, and I think I have that on one of my PowerPoints. Just go to bed. Do not. Just go to bed. And if you're fighting with your partner, your spouse, whoever, go to bed. Because after 10 o'clock is 95% of my domestic violence conflicts that end up with charges. It's after 10 when we're tired, hungry, and 95% of them are alcohol related. So don't do it. That's all I'm saying. These are ways to prevent. Do not address the conflict immediately. You don't have to. You can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to get back to you on that. I got to sit on this. I got to process this. I got to think about this. I got to get out of my fight, flight, or freeze. I got to get here. So that's the only way you do that, is to take a break. So that's into the next one. So so my, as I was saying, see handout on this one, it's a little conflict blog. And then I have the list of what you do with conflict. And then I have this little cycle at the end of that handout. So Heather will send you those with this PowerPoint, all the extra handouts that I have. So this is just how you work, is expectations. Those are boundaries. Listening with concern. That's seeking to understand first before you're understood. That's Covey's habit number 5. Ask clarifying question. So tell me, so when your kid comes home at 1 o'clock, are you going to ask them where they've been and blah, blah, blah? No. So that's not a time to deal with that, but this is later. Here's the expectation. We need to feel safe. I don't feel safe when you come home and you just broke my trust. Here's the expectation. I'm going to listen with concern. This is the new expectation. If you don't let me know where you are, this happens, or that happens, or at least they got home at 1 because, curfew, you can be picked up after 1. Restate your concern with empathy and then negotiate if possible. Super simple. This is it. This is it. Like, how do you do that after the fact, though? You got to be clear. You got to be in your frontal lobes, and you have to have those clear expectations set. And you're like, okay, so you don't get your car tomorrow. You get to lose these 2 days of privileges because you didn't come home on time, and you don't get the car keys for this amount of time. So and then here's the negotiation. But mom, I got to get to work. Blah 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 blah. Okay, well then here's the negotiation. You can have the car for work. If you are 5 minutes late from work, then you violate that trust, and we start all over, right? So it's just a little example. Okay, so this is my favorite little tree. I have this sitting right here on my desk all the time. I do this in group all the time. And so this is my tree. This is how we manage the root issue, but we have to know what the leafy issue is first. So when we go into conflict and we go into anger, what's really going on if we go from conflict, like this conflict with a teen, into anger, into rage, into resentment, into deep inadequacies and getting stuck and getting anxious? That's something else is going on that's deeper, okay? Once again, it's irritability can be, I'm tired and hungry, and that's just it. You don't even know. So there could be lots and lots of things going on. But first of all, what a leafy issue is, and this is, you can write this tree down anytime, any place, do it with your kiddo. Wait, I have an issue. Okay, well, let's write a tree down. Let's draw a tree, and here's the issue. And then this is how it makes me feel, is the trunk. And then the root issue is there's some sort of loss, grief, and trauma. There's self-concept issues, that self-esteem. I feel worthless. I feel like nobody cares. I'm hopeless. I'm depressed. So some deep depression. So here's the leafy issue, whatever that is. My examples are like failed relationships or financial issues, or the kiddo comes to you and says, I don't know what to do about this issue. I'm having a friend issue. And so you draw it, and then here's, how does this make you feel? But what's in the root? Well, I want to belong. Well, yeah, that's in the root. Belonging and shame. I feel like I just want to belong and they leave me out. And I feel like, and that's your self-concept. Self-concept is how you think people view you. And your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-value, they're all different things. Self-concept is the mother of all of those. Okay? So what's in your root issue? That's where that's what we tackle, and that's what you treat, and that's what we got to get into. Now, if there's grief and trauma, then you have got to treat that. So my wheel that talks about this, grief spelled wrong on there. So here's my wheel, and that's what is on the outside of shame, mad, sad, scared, is grief, loss, trauma, powerless. So some kind of powerless is in the root, or a childhood trauma. So that's what you got to treat to help the leafy issue. Because remember, the leafy issue drops off, feeds the root. It doesn't have to be a permanent issue. It's usually not. It's a temporary issue. But when those leaves fall off and feed the root and nourish the roots get deeper with that issue. So do you get the analogy? Hopefully you can ask a question at the end about this if you don't. Hopefully you get that analogy. It's just very visual for the child or for anybody. If you're doing a team meeting and you're like, hey, here's our issue. This makes us feel really scared and inadequate, and I fear this, but here's the root issue. I mean, you can do it with anything. Here's the 4 horsemen. We have to know when we get defensive, when we're criticizing, and when we're using contempt and stonewalling. So I've talked about them a little bit. Stonewalling's avoiding and withdrawing emotionally and physically. Defensiveness is when someone tells me they're sorry and I get defensive because they didn't do it right. Contempt is I'm going to roll my eyes and I'm going to attack you with, passive aggressive. Contempt is like, I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you didn't pay that bill. I can't believe that I have to ask you about everything. So criticism is attacking a person's character and in a personal way. Criticism does not work. Does not work ever. And there's no such thing in my book because of John Gottman's research on these and others is constructive criticism. We like to call it that. Does not work. Constructive criticism does not work. So these are things to avoid. And then on the other side here on my PowerPoint is how to, the antidotes is complain without blame, and defensiveness is take responsibility. Contempt is build culture of appreciation. So build something like that. So you don't get, you know what, I appreciate you letting me know about that. I appreciate you doing this, instead of getting passive aggressive or, huffy and puffy under your breath. So stonewalling. So do your own self-soothing. So the best way to do stonewalling, to not do stonewalling, is to just call a timeout. So that's the next one too. And I'll go over that. So how to call a timeout, instead of stonewalling. Stonewalling is not a timeout. A timeout is not stonewalling. So if you're just going to say, hey, I need a timeout, I need 10 minutes to 24 hours, that's not stonewalling. That's shutting down, but putting up a boundary. But you're not physically and emotionally shutting down. You're going to just take a break. So that's different. Okay, so a fun little tip. And I don't know where I came up with this. I just made it up one day. Seriously, like I was in a session and I thought, we've got to do some hot topic. So meaning I made up the word hot topic. So when I have a couple or a family, everybody has hot topics. That's called conflict, right? Or that leads to other issues. So this is the rule about hot topics. It has worked. I've had families do it. It works. If you have consistency and if you've made prior rules, okay? So here's your choices, a jar or a notebook. You put a jar out and you still have a notebook because you write in the notebook and you tear it off and fold it up and put it in the jar of a topic that needs to be addressed, that's hot. That's a conflict that is bugging someone in the family, right? And I have couples do this every single week, and I have families do it every single week. And once a week for 30 minutes max, okay? It shouldn't be more than that. It shouldn't be less than that. It's just, and if you need to go every other week, cool. They're like, oh, we don't have time to do 30 minutes of hot topic time. We're going to go every other week. Okay. It's just up to you. This is conflict resolution right here. So you write a topic of concern and you can put it in the jar. That way, if you can't read their writing, if you can't predict who wrote it, then it's just in the jar. And then on Sunday at 3:00 for your 30-minute hot topic time, you pull those things out of the jar. Okay. Now, I like hot topic notebook because during the week, because we're strained, we're ornery, we're tired, hungry, it's not really a good time to bring up a hot topic. It really isn't. So what do? You write it down in the hot topic notebook for the family. And this hot topic notebook does not get talked about until you need to on that scheduled time. So I have people put 5 stars next to that topic, or 4 stars or 3 stars or 2 stars. So if it's a 5-star hot topic, those go first. So you get those out of the way. Now you have to make rules about that. It has to be safety. There can't be any 4 horsemen. The rule is you cannot use the 4 horsemen in hot topic time because you can't get defensive. You can't criticize the other person. You can't stonewall. You sit down and you shut up and you like stonewall and you emotionally shut down. That is not acceptable. All of you have to be very safe. So if that happens, then you call a timeout for 10 minutes and come back to it. So that's just a little idea of how to write down some things on a notebook. Now, on the positive side of that, right next to the hot topic notebook, have a notebook that's called What's Going Right? What are we doing right as a family? What are we doing right as a couple? What are you doing right as a kid? Oh my gosh, we have got to focus on that stuff. So put a jar for here's all the things that are going right and the things I appreciate about you. And then here's the notebook of, okay, we're going to do hot topic time. This is a 5-star. We really need to stop leaving empty dishes all over the house. You know, whatever it is. I had it's like the dad of the family. He's like, I can't think of anything. Everything's fine. I don't want to complain. And I'm like, no, find something. Something's in there that's bothering you that you just don't know yet. And so you gotta, it's not like looking for negative things, but it's a hot topic that builds up into resentment. And that's what we want to prevent. Okay. So here's some other checklists. You can just read through these when you get the PowerPoint if you can't see it right now. It's just a little bit of checklist of fair fighting rules. And I have the whole handout on that too. This is just the before you begin, discuss one issue, no yelling, expressing your feelings, take turns, no stonewalling, like I said, take a timeout, like I said, attempt to come to compromise and understanding. So those are fair fighting rules. And so if you use some of these rules in your hot topic time, as even if you talked every 10 minutes, at the end of the day for 10 minutes as a couple, what would that look like? And just saying, okay, this is hot topic time. We're not going to talk about anything else, but we really need to go over this. And you had these rules set up. It's like, just don't get heated. Okay, we could do this for 10 minutes. We can take turns. We need to talk about this kid. We need to talk about homework. We need to talk about this bill. And then talk about it. And then listen and understand and then compromise if you need to. Come to a compromise. But if there's a black and white deal breaker with some conflict, there's no compromise. Okay, tips for timeout and conflict right here. Thought stopping again. Stay present. Knowing what the reality is of the root issue. So I went over the root issues, right? You got to know what the real issue is. Be emotionally intelligent. Know your secondary emotions. Listen to seek to understand first. That's habit 5 if you want to look it up. Love the book. It's in my top 5. It is one of my favorite books I teach out of constantly. Habit 5, teach that to your kids. Hey, how do you seek to understand first before you're understood? Logically impact self-talk. So the logical impact, that means I've got to look at the risks. Is this really worth risking this right now? You have to self-talk that. What are the risks? If it's not, if it's against if you talk like that for like 5 minutes, even 30 seconds, like anywhere between 30 seconds and 5 minutes, you're going to start looking and listing the risks, and that gets you into the logical side of your lobe right here instead of the emotional. So do pros and cons, list the risks. Is it really worth fighting with this person about? Is it really worth sending that email that's going to cause way more conflict because I'm trying to get something back out of it? It's something back for me. If it's not a win-win, don't do it. Look at conflict as a business deal. I look at conflict as a business deal with couples, with kids. It's a business deal. This is a win-win for me. This is a win-win for you. If it's not, I'm sorry. It's done. Because these are my boundaries. So if you understand what that kind of looks like, think about a business deal. You get logical with the business deal, right? You write down pros and cons. You know the risks. You have a contract. You have timeouts. You don't jump to conclusions. You know what the root issue is. So think of a business deal. And here's resources. So we have time for questions here. So here's my, Covey's book, Highly Effective Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'll be talking about him in later workshops about families. And Gottman, that talks a lot about the 4 Horsemen. And then this is the 2 that I want to really quickly bring up that I just found, honestly, last night. I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to one of Brene Brown's new podcasts. By the way, you can look her up. In the podcast, she has new podcasts. So I thought, I'm going to listen to one of her podcasts last night. Guess what it was? That it was Harriet Lerner, and she talked about these two books. Well, guess what the book is called? A Dance with Anger, Women's Guide to Changing Patterns of Intimate Relationships. Amazing podcast with Brene Brown. Then, and this was just a couple weeks ago that they did this, then the next one was, why don't you apologize? Oh my gosh, I could do a whole class on just apologizing now. And I downloaded that book and listened to a full chapter of it this morning. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this book. Why don't we apologize? We're really bad at apologizing. And she goes through the steps of what an apology is and how to do it right. And this is big with conflict and anger management, because we get angry because the other person doesn't apologize. And then we have conflict with them, and then we hold it to them. And so anyways, that's a little bit of that. And if you want to go to Gottman's blog, he has a little video about what is the Four Horsemen. So that's the link there. Okay. And Crucial Conversations is on there, like I talked about. Okay, Heather, it's your turn.
Okay, so someone said, is anger learned?
So the first myth is that it's hereditary, that it's learned. It's not. But it's not. It is a habitual habit in the brain, though, that can be a habit. It's not inherited. So learned, inherited, I don't know if that's the same thing.
What my question was is, it's not inherited, but being raised in that type of environment and seeing that that's how conflict is handled,
right?
Is it not learned?
So yes, because it depends, because you can learn how to be passive or aggressive in that situation. So if you were taught to deal with conflict with aggression, with punching someone, then are you going to automatically punch someone when there's aggressive things? Not likely. You could be passive. You could shut down, and you could leave the situation and just, be passive, and then let that bully keep on bullying you. So you either learn to be passive or aggressive back. So yes, you do learn how to defend yourself in defensive, because those are your defense mechanisms. So your cortisol says, okay, you're going to either punch that person or you're going to run away. You're going to flee. So it's fight, flight, or freeze. You're going to do one of the three when you're in a hostile situation. But is it learned? You do learn how to deal with that because your automatic defense brain kicks in, but it doesn't have to be aggressive equals aggressive. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, because when you're raised with one parent being aggressive and one parent being passive, a helicopter parent and a drill sergeant, which is what they're called, you'll pick out what you do, how to defend yourself in that situation, but that doesn't mean you're going to be aggressive back. It's usually you'll turn into be a passive. So yeah. Okay,
and then the next one was, is conflict in front of children good or bad?
Oh, good question. So in this book that I kind of listened to this morning and last night, and about apologizing, the biggest thing in her 20 years of her research, when she went and wrote this book about apologizing, why don't you apologize? And she wrote this in 2017, is that kids didn't see their parents dealing with conflict correctly and apologizing to each other. They didn't witness that. They didn't model that. So yes, because conflict is good. It is not a bad thing. Conflict is good when it's dealt with and shown and modeled to be like, yeah, we can disagree. We can have this conflict, and this is how we do it. And then we apologize. We try to converse about, whatever it is that we're conflicting about. But absolutely. Now, aggression is abusive. So no. So if the conflict goes into a behavior of aggressive, that's when we get into domestic violence.
Okay, so I'm going to email you this, but people are asking for additional resources about the tree analogy, particularly for kids.
Okay.
So, and then a couple other ones, so I'll email it to you. And then
So I've got in the handouts, by the way, I've got a stop handout how to do stop, how to fair fight, the conflict blog, and an assertive paper. So that's a whole paper on, now that we want to be assertive instead of aggressive, how do we do that? That the assertive paper's in there too.
cool. Okay, I think this is a good question. It says, my husband is a police officer. I have a very difficult time going to bed angry, as I always have the fear of losing him, as tomorrow is not promised. How do I get past that fear and learn to let go of the conflict in the moment and find a more appropriate time?
Well, it's just, so is it always, are you going to resolve or manage conflict at 10 o'clock at night? Let me ask you that. Are you ever going to resolve or manage conflict at 10 o'clock at night? It just doesn't work. You say, I love you, and because I love you, I'm really going to need to talk to you about this tomorrow at 3 o'clock when you get off work. And just, it's those verbiage. It doesn't mean that, tomorrow isn't promised, so we just have to deal with it. So then say, because I love you so much, I don't want to stay awake arguing with you about what we need to go over, like with your teenager coming home. Yeah, it's not worth it. It is not worth it. And so if you're angry, then do some journaling, take a break, and then try to go to sleep, try to go to bed. But never going to bed angry is not helpful. It really causes a lot of more anxiety and cortisol to happen in your brain, and you're not getting, going to your brain. So you're not getting the proper REM sleep.
I think that's awesome. And for those that haven't always stay up and argue instead of going to bed, just from my personal perspective from your classes, I've tried that, and it's crazy. Like once you wake up, you're still bothered, but it seems like such a less issue. Like you're not.
That's the other. Right.
You wake up and you're like, why was
because your brain has repaired from REM sleep. Your brain toxins in your brain from that cortisol has actually repaired.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So if you haven't tried that.
And then go write it in the notebook, right? It's like, oh my gosh, well, this has got to be addressed, but you know what? We're going to wait till Sunday at 3 o'clock, and it's now Friday night. You just don't do it.
And the conversation goes so much more smooth, like, because you're just, I don't know, it's pretty cool. I think
you got the emotion as much.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm telling you, domestic violence. I mean, I'm telling you, so many charges across my desk, and how many intakes and people I hear with public intox and alcohol issues and domestic violence issues connected to those alcohol charges. I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories of that and what's happened. And it's late at night. It's when there's conflict. It's not worth it.
And then the last question is, what if the person wants to bring up the conflict at that moment? How do you deal with that?
So this is my role play, right? Quick on this one. Very good. Because this is my role play. So when you say, you know what, I feel really disrespected when you yell at me. This is my role play with an office bully. You're at work. You're in the hallway after a meeting. So, I feel disrespected, secondary emotion, when you yell at me. So let's come back and talk about this after lunch. You finally stood up to the bully and you were assertive. That's very assertive. Those are 5 classes all in 2 sentences. So here it is. It's like, and then that person responds to you and says, no, we're going to talk about it right now, right here. I've heard it so many times with a mom and a son, or, the grown son comes home and is like, nope, we're going to talk about this right now, right now. I just walked in the door, Mom. I just worked 12 hours. I'm really tired and hungry and dirty. I need a shower. And no, we're going to talk about right here, right now. Same thing with the bullying. No, we're not going to wait till after lunch. So what do? You restate the boundary and walk. That's it. You restate the boundary. Say, no, I'm not going to talk about this right now. I'm not in a good space, place, time, doesn't matter. That's a boundary. And if the boundary violator wants to continue doing that, then it's called very aggressive. That's abusive. They're coming at you after you've said, no, I'm not talking about this right now, but let's schedule a time to talk about it.
So with that same comment, they said most of the time he is impaired or has been doing something illegal.
Okay, so number one.
This in order to work towards getting a protective order removed.
So when you're doing legal issues, yes, get some help with legal issues. Number one, you cannot reason with someone that is impaired, and 0.04 is impairment. That's 1 or 2 beers now in Utah. So anybody that's impaired, you can't do these skills with. You can't have a conversation. You can't. So yeah, if they're hurting themselves or others, if they're driving drunk, if they're going to leave, then you call 911. It's like, no, I need to talk to you about this right now. You can't get in your car because you've been drinking. Then that's a 911 call. That's different. And if someone's unsafe, then we go to the protective order route and we go into the legal part of all this. And yeah, so you can't reason with someone that's impaired.
Okay.
Doesn't work.
And maybe in her situation, it might be a good idea for her to schedule a therapy appointment to kind of get more one-on-one advice for that is what I.
Yep. And I do tons of that in my private practice with legal stuff.
So the person that wrote that in, if you just want to email me your phone number and I will give you a call and we can get you scheduled so you can meet with Carol and talk about that.
Yep.
Okay, so that's it. So thank you everybody for being here, and I will send you the recording probably tomorrow. If you don't see it tomorrow, just send me an email and I'll get it to you, but you should get it. So hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Have a good week.